She said it was just a dare, but the moment I saw her lips on his, I realized love was just a dare too. The rooftop lights blurred into gold streaks through the tears I refused to blink away. Music pounded like mockery in my ears as her laughter rang out, free, wild, and cruel. I should have turned away, but I couldn't. My fiancée, Elena, stood there in her white satin dress, kissing Damon Vale, the billionaire boy everyone worshipped like he owned the air we breathed. For a second, the world went silent. Just her hand on his chest, his smug grin, and the sound of my heart folding in on itself. She didn't even flinch when our eyes met across the crowd. That night, something in me died, and something else was born. Something colder. Something that doesn't beg, doesn't break, it plans. Before the kiss, before the rooftop lights and the champagne flutes, there was us. Me and Elena. I wasn't born into money. My parents ran a corner hardware store, the kind of place where people still paid in cash and asked about your family before buying a hammer. I started my own small renovation business with nothing but a borrowed truck and a handful of loyal clients. Long hours, cracked hands, and coffee that tasted like burnt hope, that was my life. And then, there was Elena. She walked into my world like she didn't belong in it, because she didn't. She was studying law at the time, balancing textbooks and dreams of courtroom drama. I met her when my company was hired to fix her university's faculty lounge. She spilled coffee on my blueprints and spent 10 minutes apologizing while I just stared at her. I should have been annoyed. Instead, I was done for. Elena was elegance stitched into chaos. She'd talk about justice and poetry in the same breath, laugh with her whole face, and somehow make me forget that I was covered in sawdust. She said she liked my simplicity, it makes me feel grounded, she used to say. We started slow, coffee runs, late-night walks around campus, quiet talks under dim streetlights. I remember one night in particular. She was sitting cross-legged on my old couch, wearing one of my shirts, reading out loud from her casebook. Her hair was tied up, but a few strands kept falling over her eyes. You should be resting, I said. She looked up, smiled that soft smile of hers. You should be charging more for your work, she countered. I laughed. You're my home, not some fancy penthouse. And you're my forever, she whispered, like it was a promise she'd already kept. I believed her. God, I believed every word. When she graduated, I was there, front row, sweaty palms holding a bouquet that cost more than I'd admit. She cried when she saw me. Later, she said, you were the only one who clapped before they even said my name. That's how we were. Small moments that felt infinite. As her career took off, I kept building mine. My company grew from a one-man show to a modest team. I worked late, saved every cent, planned our future like a man possessed. When she said she wanted to specialize in corporate law, I supported her without blinking. When she said she needed to network more, I nodded and stayed home with takeout waiting on the counter. She'd tell me about her world, the galas, the sharp suits, the luxury offices. I'd listen, proud but uneasy. Her eyes would light up when she talked about the big players, people who could buy in seconds what I earned in years. Once, I teased her about it. Careful, you'll end up forgetting about small-town people like me. She smiled, threading her fingers through mine. I love that you still think money matters to me. It doesn't? I asked. She leaned closer, voice soft. It doesn't by the way you look at me. I held on to that line like scripture. We moved in together soon after. Mornings became rituals. I'd make her coffee exactly how she liked it, a dash of vanilla, 2 sugars. She'd sit by the counter scrolling through her phone, teasing me about my work boots leaving marks on the floor. Nights were slower, dinners half-burned, movies we never finished, plans we swore we'd make happen. When I proposed, I didn't do it with flash or champagne. Just a quiet evening at the pier, sunset falling over the water. I told her, I don't have much, but I'll give you everything I've got. She said yes before I even showed her the ring. For a while, it felt like a dream stitched in gold and dust. We talked about houses, kids, growing old somewhere quiet. She'd joke about having matching gray hair, I'd joke I was halfway there already. If you told me then that it was all temporary, that love could expire like spoiled milk, I would have laughed in your face. Because back then, I thought love was work. I thought if you gave enough, stayed loyal enough, sacrificed enough, it would stay. But love, as I would learn, has its own economy. And some people trade loyalty for luxury without blinking. I just didn't know yet that Elena was one of them. The first cracks don't come with shouting or slammed doors. They start quietly, like the slow groan of wood before it splinters. It began when Elena started her new job at Harlan & Company, one of those glossy law firms where everyone's perfume costs more than my monthly rent. She was radiant that morning, adjusting her blazer in the mirror, excitement gleaming in her eyes. "I'll be working with some of the best in the city," she said, brushing invisible lint from her sleeve. "I know," I smiled. "They're lucky to have you." At first, it was all stories about the office, late hours, demanding clients, impossible deadlines. I'd listen while reheating leftovers, proud of her, proud of us. But soon, new names crept into her conversations. One name stuck, Damon Vale. He was a client, she said. A visionary investor, young, brilliant, charming. People called him the billionaire boy. Because he'd turned his first profit before most of us could pay rent. She talked about him with a kind of reverence I hadn't heard before. "He's intense but inspiring," she said once, scrolling through an article about him. "You should see the way he carries himself." I laughed lightly. "What, should I start wearing gold watches too?" She smiled, but her eyes didn't quite meet mine. "No. I like that you don't need all that." The way she said it, it sounded like reassurance, but felt like distance. The changes came gradually. First, it was her phone. She used to leave it anywhere, on the couch, by the sink, face up and unlocked. Now it was always flipped face down. She started getting messages at odd hours. The screen would light up, she'd glance, swipe it away, and smile faintly like it meant nothing. "Are you working late again?" I asked one night. She didn't look up from her laptop. "Networking dinner. You know how it is." "Networking?" She nodded. "You'd like them. Damon's hosting. Big players from the firm will be there." Something about the way she said Damon, too casual, too familiar, tightened something in my chest. "You could have told me earlier," I said. "It was last minute." Her tone was light, but the air between us wasn't. I tried to play it cool, pretending it didn't matter. After all, she was building her career. I'd always told her to chase what she deserved. Still, the dinners grew frequent. The texts came more often. The laughter she once shared with me was now spent on someone else's jokes. One evening, my friend Jacob stopped by the workshop. He'd known me since college, the kind of friend who didn't sugarcoat the truth. "So, how's the future Mrs.?" he asked, sipping his beer. "She's good. Busy. You know how it is." He gave me a look. "Busy's one thing. Distance is another." I frowned. "What do you mean?" "I saw her at that rooftop bar downtown last week. It looked like a firm thing. She wasn't exactly blending in. The whole group was dripping in cash. One guy, slick suit, slicker smile, kept her attention the whole night. My stomach sank. "Damon Vale?" He raised an eyebrow. "So you know him?" "She works with him." "It's nothing." Jacob didn't look convinced. "Just be careful, man. That circle she's in. They love money more than loyalty." I brushed it off, laughing it away. "Elena's not like that." But his words stuck like splinters under my skin. Days blurred. We still had breakfast together sometimes, but it felt like acting out an old routine. She'd smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. Her phone would buzz, she'd excuse herself. One night, I caught her standing on the balcony, whispering into her phone. When she noticed me, she flinched, then forced a laugh. "Just talking to a colleague," she said. "At midnight?" She shrugged. "Deadlines don't sleep." I wanted to believe her. I really did. But something in her voice, light, practiced, made my chest ache. When she went to bed, I sat in the dark living room, her laughter echoing faintly from my memory. I stared at the empty wine glass she'd left on the counter, lipstick smudged on the rim. That's when I thought, love doesn't need passwords, does it? The next morning, I asked her about us. "Have I done something wrong?" I asked. Her fork paused midair. "What? No. Why would you think that? You just feel far away lately." She sighed, reaching for my hand. "I'm just tired. This job, it's consuming. But it's for us. You trust me, don't you?" I nodded, forcing a smile. "Of course." She kissed my cheek, gentle but distracted. "Good. Because you're my anchor, okay? Don't let go of me." I promised I wouldn't. But I didn't realize she already had. The night before her bachelorette party, she came home late, the scent of perfume and champagne trailing behind her. I was on the couch, half asleep, waiting. She smiled softly. "Hey. You're still up. Wanted to see you." She kicked off her heels, rubbing her temples. "You don't have to wait for me like that. You'll make yourself crazy. I just miss you." Her movements slowed. "I know. Things have just been, a lot." She sat beside me, curling her legs under herself. Her eyes looked tired, but her lips were painted, fresh. There was something different in her, something distant, unreachable. "Tomorrow's your big day," I said, forcing a grin. "Excited?" She hesitated. "Yeah. The girls planned something wild, apparently. Promise me you won't overthink tomorrow, okay?" "Why would I?" She smiled faintly. "Because you always do." Then she leaned forward, kissed my forehead, a kiss that felt more like closure than affection. Something in her tone, in her touch, felt wrong. Too careful. Too final. She went to bed soon after, leaving me sitting there with that strange heaviness in my chest. I stared at her empty wine glass, at the quiet apartment we'd once filled with laughter. I didn't know it then, but that would be the last peaceful night we'd ever share. Because by the next evening, everything I believed in would unravel, one kiss at a rooftop party, one moment that would tear my world apart. I wasn't supposed to be there. That's the part that keeps echoing in my head. I wasn't supposed to see what I saw. Her friend, Mia, had called me earlier that afternoon. "You should swing by the party later," she said, half laughing. "It'll be funny to crash the Bachelorette. You can pretend to be the jealous fiancée." I almost said no. Elena had asked me not to overthink, after all. But something inside me, instinct, maybe, whispered that I needed to see her. I needed to remind myself what all of this was for. So I went. The venue was a rooftop bar overlooking the city, gold lights, glass walls, and music that bled into the night sky. It looked like a dream built on someone else's money. I wasn't dressed for it, my shirt felt too plain, my shoes too scuffed. But I went anyway, heart hammering like I was trespassing in a life that didn't belong to me. When the elevator doors opened, laughter hit me first, loud, carefree, expensive. I scanned the crowd, searching for her among the sequins and champagne. And then I saw her. Elena. She stood near the edge of the rooftop, her white satin dress catching the light. A glass of champagne dangled from her hand. She looked radiant, almost unreal, and so far away from the woman I'd shared burnt toast and coffee with that morning. Then I saw him. Damon Vale. He was exactly what the magazines made him out to be: perfect jawline, perfect suit, perfect arrogance. He leaned close to her, whispering something that made her laugh, the kind of laugh that once belonged to me. My chest tightened. I started forward, ready to surprise her, to wrap my arms around her from behind, maybe make her jump, maybe make her laugh again. That was the plan. That was all I wanted. But then it happened. The music swelled, someone shouted something, "Kiss the bride-to-be." And before I could even breathe, Damon grinned and leaned in. And she didn't move. Didn't flinch. Didn't hesitate. She let him kiss her. Full, open, unapologetic. The crowd erupted, cheering, clapping, phones flashing. Her friends whooped like it was all part of the game. Maybe to them, it was. To me, it was the sound of my life breaking in half. I stood there frozen, half hidden in the shadows, watching her hand rest against his chest like it belonged there. Watching her laugh afterward, champagne spilling from her glass as she wiped her mouth and said something I couldn't hear over the music. I didn't stay to see more. I didn't want to. I turned and walked back toward the elevator, every step heavy and slow, like walking through wet cement. The lights blurred around me. The air felt thinner with every breath. She didn't even hesitate. The words repeated in my head, over and over, until they lost meaning. By the time I reached the street, the city noise was just a hum in my ears. I pulled out my phone, thumb shaking as I typed one line. "Congratulations. You just kissed your future goodbye." I hit send before I could stop myself. Her reply came seconds later. Then another. Then 10. Then 30. "Elena, wait, where are you? Elena, it wasn't what it looked like. Elena, please, answer me. Elena, it was just a game, a stupid dare. Elena, please, talk to me." I didn't respond. By the time I reached my truck, my phone was vibrating non-stop. I threw it onto the passenger seat and just sat there, staring at the city skyline, the same skyline she used to call our dream. Now it felt like mockery. I drove. I don't remember where. The roads blurred. I ended up at the pier where I'd proposed to her. Same spot. Same silence. I got out, leaned against the railing, and stared at the water. The night was cold. The sea didn't care. I tried to cry, but the tears wouldn't come. Maybe because part of me already knew, this was always going to happen. I just hadn't wanted to see it. My mind kept flashing back, her laughter, her perfume, her whisper that night on the couch, "You're my forever." Forever. What a cruel word. The phone buzzed again. I picked it up this time, thumb hovering over her name. Her messages flooded the screen. "Elena, please. I need you to answer. Elena, I didn't mean anything by it. Elena, it was a dare. Damon made a joke and everyone. Elena, please, I love you." I stared at the words until the screen dimmed. If it was a dare, why did she smile like that? Why didn't she pull away? Why did it look so natural, like she'd rehearsed it 100 times? I locked the phone and tossed it aside. The sea breeze hit harder now. It smelled like rust and regret. I thought of everything I'd given up for her, the extra hours I worked, the vacations I skipped, the quiet pride I felt every time she achieved something new. I'd built a life around her, and she traded it for a moment of luxury, a laugh, a kiss. My chest burned. Somewhere in the distance, fireworks went off, maybe part of the party, maybe some stranger's celebration. The sound twisted in my gut. She was celebrating, too. Probably still laughing, maybe telling her friends I was overreacting. I didn't text her back. I didn't call. I just sat there, numb, until the stars blurred above me. The next morning, I packed a bag. No note. No explanation. I left my phone on the counter and drove until the city disappeared behind me. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew what I was leaving behind. Her. Us. Everything that once mattered. It took days for the numbness to fade. When it did, what came next wasn't pain, it was clarity. I realized something cruel but true: Elena didn't want love. She wanted the idea of it. The picture-perfect story, the ring, the comfort of devotion, until something shinier came along. She wanted luxury. Fine. I'd give her emptiness instead. No screaming, no begging, no dramatic closure. Just silence. Because silence, I learned, is louder than revenge. For now. Revenge started as a whisper and grew into a machine. I left without drama because drama is for people who need witnesses. I drove until the city's haloed skyline was nothing more than a smudge in my rearview. I slept in motels and worked in diners. I let the numbness do its work for a while. It burned away the immediate sting and left behind something cleaner, a hard line of purpose. The first thing I did was the only sensible thing: I focused on what I could control. My truck. My crew. The stubborn little company I'd built out of grit and bad coffee. I threw myself into it like a man rebuilding a wall with his bare hands. Where before I'd been content with small renovations, I started taking bigger jobs, bidding on projects I used to think were out of reach. I worked nights, then dawns, then whole weekends. I learned to sleep in the van between jobs and be awake for the deals that came at dawn. I learned to say no to pity and yes to opportunities that scared me. Pain is a terrible teacher, but it teaches fast. I turned anger into a ledger. Every sleepless night became a line item. Every memory of her laugh was converted into a strategy note. How do you beat a man who started life with a trust fund and a celebrity? You make his world smaller. You make what he controls look fragile. You make people look at the billionaire and think, maybe he's not the only one who knows how to win. Damon Vale was not invincible. He was a product. A heavily marketed product with a sharper jawline. He had companies, investments, glossy headlines. But he had hollow places too: deals with fragile partners, board members who answer to numbers instead of loyalty, and a public image that could be punctured. I began to study him like a mason studies a wall: find the weak mortar, exploit it, and push. First, I rebuilt my business into something more than a local contractor. I rebranded. I hired an accountant who could make numbers sing in a way I hadn't understood before. I learned to pitch, to speak cleanly at meetings, to present balance sheets like promises. I found a quiet lawyer, efficient, sharp, no theatrics, who helped me tighten every contract. I stopped doing everything myself and started building a team: foremen who respected the work, an operations manager who kept the chaos tidy, and a marketing guy who knew how to make a pickup truck look like a brand. Jacob came around again after a few months. "You're different," he said the first time he saw the new office: smaller, cleaner, a real desk and not just a folding table. He handed me a cup of coffee like a truce. "You look like you've got a plan." "I do," I said. "And it doesn't include crying on the couch." He laughed, but there was agreement in his eyes. He knew me. He'd watched me build and watched me almost lose it. He became my right hand, the kind of friend you can hand a demolition plan to and trust he won't question your morals, only your measurements. Word travels in construction circles. We started winning bids that previously would have been handed to larger firms, projects where Damon's companies were sometimes involved as subcontractors. I made sure my bids were smarter, not cheaper. I offered craftsmanship and a brand of reliability that looked good on press releases. I learned to work a room, to smile in a way that suggested neither insecurity nor malice. I became comfortable in suits I could afford, tailoring my manner as much as my lapels. Months into it, I heard the rumor I had half expected: Damon and Elena had parted ways. Not a dramatic break, more like a courtesy dismissal. Damon doesn't do second rounds, someone at a networking event said casually, as if it were an aphorism on his business card. The whisper carried an ugly clarity. If she was a momentary amusement, she had no place in his plans. Hearing that should have made something in me pause. Instead, it steadied the blade I'd been sharpening. She had hurt me because she saw a ladder and decided to climb. Damon had used her because she was convenient. Their worlds were performance spaces where people were props, and I'd been naive enough to think ours was a home. Elena's name stopped carrying the warm weight it once did. It became a variable in a larger equation. I watched as the fast friends of her firm distanced themselves once the press shifted focus. Invitations disappeared. The people who had flirted with her success now fuzzed out like fingerprints. Reputation, I learned, was less like love and more like a wax figure, soft and malleable under heat, but brittle if cracked. She reached out to me, of course. Calls at odd hours, text messages full of half apologies and frantic pleas. I read them and deleted them without answering. Ignoring her was not cruelty, it was preservation. I owed her nothing. I owed myself everything. As my company grew, so did the scope of my ambition. I didn't want petty revenge. I wanted a recalibration, a public narrowing of the world she traded into and the man she traded me for. The target wasn't just Damon's ego, it was the currency he represented, access, glamour, the belief that wealth buys immunity. I intended to make sure that belief faltered. That's why I set my eyes on the charity gala. It was one of those events Damon and his circle loved, expensive cocktails, expensive smiles, and people who wrote checks with flourish while their consciences stayed tucked away. Elena would show. Damon would show. Her old friends would be there, all of them marked by the same warm glow of wealth. The gala was a stage, and I planned to take mine. Sponsoring a gala was out of our league, or it had been. But part of my plan involved careful alliances. I reached out to a civic-minded developer named Ortiz, a man who liked the idea of shifting the spotlight to honest tradesmen for once. I presented him with a pitch: fund a sponsorship under a new program designed to showcase local businesses. I sold the idea with the same precision I sold a renovation. This would be publicity for his development, a PR win tied to genuine community investment. He signed the check. It was a small fortune for our company, but the return would be exponential. I hired PR people who understood optics. I sat with them and outlined the narrative I wanted, a story about a man who rose from the garage to the skyline, about honest labor taking its place beside glossy philanthropy. We curated images of me on job sites, of my crew in logo shirts, of a company handing out scholarships to apprentices. The message wasn't about spite. It was about legitimacy, and that legitimacy would be the blade I'd slide across Damon's image. Of course, plans are fragile. They warp under real life. There were setbacks. A major subcontractor pulled out a week before we were due to sign for a municipal job. An unexpected inspection forced us to delay a big reveal. 1 month, our accountant found a tax discrepancy that required us to throw today's profits back into paperwork. Each one felt like a test. Was I doing the right thing? Was this just ego dressed as morality? There were nights I replayed her smile until it made me nauseous. I pictured the kiss again, her lips on his, the way the crowd cheered. In the quiet hours, doubt like an invasive weed crept in. Have you made a monster out of yourself? The doubt whispered. Have you turned the man she fell in love with into something else? I would let the thought sit for a moment, then push it away. Mercy, I decided, is for the faithful. She had been neither faithful nor honest. And anyway, mercy would have felt like letting the wound fester blind. So I kept building. I polished my public face until it shone dull and steady, the exact kind of glow that would look good in a gala magazine spread. I rehearsed lines that sounded humble but conveyed success. I practiced the small gracious gestures that read as class in a sea of flash. I trained my team to meet the press with the kind of polite confidence that suggested inevitability. Along the way, I learned to feel less. That was the worst trade. Compassion thinned. Coffee tasted better. I began to enjoy the craft of it, the negotiations, the persuasive emails, the way a well-worded press release could change a perception overnight. I was good at it. Maybe too good. And then, during a late meeting over pasta in a fluorescent-lit bodega, Jacob leaned back and said, "You're gonna make them regret ever laughing that night." I looked at him. "No regret. Reconsider." He shrugged. "Same thing if you ask me." We worked in the shadows for months, quiet moves, public rehearsals. I bought the perfect suit, but the suit didn't make me feel triumphant. The triumph would be in the reveal. The triumph would be that moment when our name, my name, stood beside the glossy names everyone already valued. When the invite list for the gala came out, there it was, Damon Vale, Elena Harland, their circle of polished predators. I felt my stomach clench and, for a sliver of a second, imagined walking away and letting silence be victory. Then I thought of her laugh and the way it had sounded when she kissed him, and all the small mercies evaporated. The plan was set. I would stand in the room they thought they owned and show them that someone they dismissed could buy himself a place at their table, on his terms. I'd be calm, untouchable, and worse, dignified. That was the point. Punishment is sweeter when it is delivered with a smile. The gala smelled like other people's money, oysters on ice, perfume that could choke a thrift store shirt, and the citrus tang of cocktails poured with theatrical nonchalance. Chandelier light fractured across the marble floor, catching on diamonds and the silver of knives. Conversations hummed like distant bees. I moved through it all like a man who knew the map of a land he'd been taught to avoid. I'd rehearsed this night 1,000 times in my head. Not what I'd say, what I'd make them feel. Not loud humiliation, that's vulgar. I wanted quiet erasure. I wanted their certainty that money equaled power to wobble for a second, just long enough to make them look at what they'd dismissed and think, how did we miss him? Elena was already there when I arrived. She looked like someone holding together an old photograph. Her dress hung on her like it had been borrowed, not earned. The paint around her eyes had shifted, she tried to glue herself back into the woman who belonged to their world, but the edges were fraying. She kept her head low, fingers wrapped around a glass as if it were an anchor. For a moment I noticed how small she seemed, and that smallness did a strange thing to the ache, sharpened it into something colder. Damon, predictably, was at the center of his orbit. He moved with the easy arrogance of a man who's always been given the front row. He laughed, head tipped back, business cards flying like sparklers from his pocket, the physical embodiment of the headline that made people feel they were witnessing a triumph. People clustered with him. People orbiting him smiled in anticipation of reflected light. He ignored Elena. Not in the petty way he'd played with her before, now her relevancy was finished, he had no time to pretend she mattered. The dismissal looked almost surgical. She leaned into conversation with others and they gave her polite interest, the kind that said, "Yes, you once mattered, now you are a small, inconvenient footnote." I found the man who'd arranged the program and gave him the nod that opened doors. The host announced the next presentation and people shifted. Cameras angled like small, hungry birds. I walked onto the stage with a confidence I'd forged in months of numbness and work. The microphone was cool under my palm. I could feel 1,000 eyes line up like instruments tuned to the note of my breath. "Good evening," I said. My voice felt even. Clean. "It's an honor to be part of tonight's work." I mentioned the foundation, the apprenticeships, and the community investments, truths we'd built. The PR had done its job. The room accepted my narrative without much protest. I let them settle into admiration. Let them imagine me as a wholesome success story, one more polished slice on the evening's buffet. Then I delivered the line I'd saved for last, the small detonator wrapped in civility. "I'm proud to announce a strategic partnership between Harlan Developments and Vale Projects." I said, measured, letting their names sit together like a surprise in the room. Together we'll be co-sponsoring the new apprenticeship fund, an initiative to bring skilled trade opportunities into the city's underserved areas. There was a beat of silence, like a trapdoor dropping in the center of a theater. Heads turned. A dozen cameras tilted. Damon's face, so practiced at smiling, stilled in the most human way I'd ever seen it. For once his composure faltered. He searched the crowd, and when he found me, his smile looked thin, like it had been peeled away. Elena's reaction hit me like a physical force. Her hand clutched the stem of her glass so hard her knuckles went white. Her mouth parted. For a second, shame, recognition, and a different kind of hunger crossed her face, something that looked suspiciously like regret. It was the face of someone realizing she traded a sure anchor for glitter, and the glitter had shown its hollowness. Damon's whisper went unnoticed by most, but not by me. He said something close to a threat, calculated, corporate, but the blade had no purchase. The cameras loved the drama and leaned into it, capturing the micro-expressions of men who measure power by who can flex the biggest muscle of influence. I saw the boardroom calculation in his jaw, the quick math, reputation, alliance, optics. He'd been the one who taught me how much weight a single signed name could carry, and now I'd used that lesson against him. After the applause, polite, uncertain, I stepped down. People came up with handshakes and congratulations, their faces were unprepared for the man beneath my suit. Elena approached from the side, tears forming like a pool at the edge of her lashes. The lights found the wet on her cheeks and made a small, ridiculous halo. "You look incredible," she said, voice shaking on each syllable as if the glass had split. I studied her like an old blueprint. The lines I loved had been redrawn. There was an attempt at apology in her posture, a flustered attempt to bridge the distance she'd created. "You look familiar," I said, the words coming out soft, cold. "Like someone I once knew." Her lips trembled. "Can we talk?" She leaned forward, the plea naked in its panic. "Please." "We did," I interrupted. I watched her flinch at the simplicity of it. "You just weren't listening that night." The cameras angled in, catching her expression, opened, raw, small. Somewhere nearby, a journalist murmured into a recorder, the night's narrative splitting like light through glass, the billionaire with his empire, the woman who traded, and the tradesman who'd built himself to stand in the middle. Elena looked like she might say more. She reached out, a hand finding the edge of my sleeve as if for support. For the first time in months, her touch felt like what it was, a question, not an embrace. I let her hand go. Not unkindly, decisively. I had rehearsed this moment, all its shades, and decided on a precise economy of cruelty. Conversation would only give her scenes to rehearse later. Silence would be her stage and my statement. I smiled for the cameras then, small, civilized. A man who'd been hurt but had not been ruined. I turned and walked away. Footsteps on marble, applause thinning behind me. I moved through the crowd as if through a fog, feeling their eyes like weights and the night like a ledger closing. Behind me, Elena's whisper chased me, half apology, half plea. The microphones caught the brokenness on her face, and someone's phone glowed with the image that would be shared, commented on, dissected. She understood then what I had become, a presence that could not be fetched by a kiss or a dare. I let the cameras capture what they needed. I let the world make their own little narratives. In that small, bright room where people bought virtue on napkins and paid for images in velvet, I walked out with something colder than vengeance, a victory whose currency was dignity. The city was half asleep when I left the gala. The rain had just begun, soft and uncertain, like it didn't want to disturb the expensive silence behind me. Streetlights stretched over the wet pavement, their glow bending across puddles that looked like broken glass. My reflection came and went with every turn of the wheel, a moving ghost in a suit that didn't belong to the man I used to be. The radio stayed off. The sound of tires slicing through shallow water was enough. For the first time in months, my chest didn't feel like a locked room. There was no rush of triumph, no wild satisfaction. Just stillness, the kind that comes after you've burned every bridge and realize the ashes look peaceful. I passed the skyline where Damon's company logo blinked from a glass tower. For a heartbeat, I almost pitied him, a man whose empire was a stage, not a home. Then I thought of Elena, her trembling lips, the glint of desperation in her eyes as the cameras flashed, and the pity dissolved before it could take root. I once built my life around her. Now she stands in ruins around mine. People think revenge is about rage, fire and fury and broken glass. It's not. It's about control. It's about taking back the power that someone thought they could steal forever. And tonight, I didn't need to shout to be heard. My silence was enough. A red light stopped me at an intersection. Across the street, a couple stood under an awning, laughing, her hand tucked into his coat. I watched them for a moment, not with envy, not with nostalgia, just observation. Love, I realized, is only as strong as the truth it's built on. Ours had been built on hope, not honesty. When the light turned green, I drove on. The rain grew steadier, washing the last of the gala's cologne from my skin. I rolled down the window slightly, letting the air bite at my face. Somewhere behind me, cameras were still flashing, stories were being written, and Elena was still standing in that room of golden strangers, realizing too late that wealth doesn't buy permanence. Me. I had something she'd never understand. Peace. At the next turn, the road narrowed, the city lights dimmed, and my reflection in the windshield steadied. The man looking back at me wasn't broken anymore. Just, finished. I smiled once, not for her, not for the past, but for the quiet ahead. She kissed a billionaire and lost her world. I lost her and found mine.